Dad, I can see light. 5 words. 5 small words spoken by a 7-year-old boy who had never seen anything in his entire life. And in that moment, a billionaire who had spent $15 million trying to fix what doctors told him could never be fixed, broke down and wept. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. Because before that moment, before that thin sliver of light fell across the carpet and changed everything, there was a house full of darkness. Not just the kind you can touch, the kind that lives inside people. The kind that settles in when hope has been told one too many times to sit down and be quiet. Let me take you back to the beginning. Picture a penthouse apartment sitting high above the city of Chicago. Floor-to-ceiling windows. Marble floors. Walnut-paneled walls. The kind of home that looks like it was designed by someone who had never known a single day of suffering. But pull back those heavy curtains, if you dare, and you would find something that no amount of money could fix. Daniel Whitfield was one of the most powerful men in the tech world. His company was worth billions. His name appeared in headlines. His phone never stopped ringing with people who wanted a piece of his success. But Daniel would have traded every single dollar, every share, every headline for one simple thing. He wanted his sons to see. Leo and Eli, his 7-year-old twins, had been born into total darkness. From the very first breath they took in this world, their eyes had never registered light, color, shape, or shadow. And if that grief were not heavy enough, their mother Renee had died on the very same night they were born, leaving Daniel to carry the weight of 3 broken hearts all on his own. The curtains in that penthouse stayed shut. Always. Every table edge was padded. Every hallway was kept clear and quiet. The whole apartment had been redesigned around 2 little boys who would, according to every specialist Daniel had ever paid, never see a single thing. And Daniel had paid many specialists. $15 million worth. Doctors from Chicago, New York, Boston. Specialists flown in from Europe. Pediatric ophthalmologists with walls full of certificates and voices full of certainty. Every single one of them had looked at Leo and Eli, run their tests, reviewed their scans, and delivered the same verdict, written in the cold, clean language of medicine. Total cortical blindness. Irreversible. Permanent. $15 million. And all Daniel had to show for it were folders. Thick, heavy folders stuffed with words that all meant the same thing. Give up. He hadn't given up. But he had grown quiet. The kind of quiet that settles over a person when they have fought for so long that fighting starts to feel foolish. He still went to work. He still ran his company. He still stood on the balcony some evenings and looked out at the city lights he could see and his sons could not. And every night from somewhere upstairs he could hear them crying. Then one ordinary Tuesday morning, a woman named Clara Hendricks came for a job interview. She wasn't a doctor. She wasn't a specialist. She wasn't flying in from anywhere impressive. She was a black woman from the south side of Chicago, wearing a crisp white shirt, clean old sneakers, and carrying a neat tool bag over her shoulder. She had come to apply for the housekeeper position. The security guard at the front desk looked her over and told her, without blinking, that the service entrance was around the back. Clara looked right back at him and said, calmly and clearly, that she was there by appointment with Mr. Whitfield. That was the first thing you needed to know about Clara Hendricks. She did not shrink. Not for anyone. She got the job. $3,000 a week. 12 bedrooms, 2 offices, a library. And one rule, delivered by Daniel himself with a voice that was carefully controlled, but trembling just underneath. Do not interfere with the children's schedule. I will not allow anyone to plant hope in this house only to break it. Clara looked him in the eye and told him she did not promise what she could not be sure of. She would do her job and she would respect his family's pain. What Daniel didn't know, what he couldn't have known yet, was that Clara had spent years caring for her younger brother, who had been born with low vision. She had taught him sound games and light detection, and how to navigate a world that wasn't designed for him. And when that brother died in an accident at 15, something quietly settled inside her like a stone finding the bottom of a lake. If she was ever given the chance again, she would use everything she had learned. Her first morning on the job, Clara heard crying coming from the 2nd floor. She found Leo and Eli sitting in oversized armchairs, rocking themselves gently the way children do when comfort has to come from within, because nobody around them is offering any. The nanny, Trudy, sat across the room, eyes fixed on her phone, telling them flatly to stop crying because it wouldn't change anything. Clara stood in the doorway. Then she picked up her spray bottle and gave it one clean squeeze. SSSSSD. Both boys lifted their heads instantly, turning toward the sound with a precision that stopped Clara's breath in her chest. She introduced herself softly, asked if they wanted to play a listening game, and within minutes the two of them were giggling, tracking her movements around the room, locating her by sound alone with an accuracy that no specialist had ever thought to document. Because no specialist had ever thought to simply listen to them first. Clara's mind was already turning. She glanced at the heavy curtains sealing out the Chicago morning, and a thought lit up quietly inside her like a match being struck in a dark room. Not yet, she told herself. Build trust first. The next morning, she asked the boys gently if they wanted to try something new. She told them they could say stop at any time and she would stop immediately. No questions asked. They said yes. Clara walked to the window. She reached up with both hands and pinched the fabric of the curtain between her fingers. And she opened the tiniest slit. A single thread of light, barely wider than a finger, fell silently across the carpet. Leo turned his face toward it immediately. Eli's breath caught. Something feels different, Leo whispered, his voice careful, like someone stepping onto ice for the first time. It's brighter, Eli added, trembling, but not with fear. With something closer to wonder. Clara stepped slowly across the beam, casting her shadow over it. Darker, Leo said, without a moment's hesitation. Like someone walked between us and something. Clara stood very still. Her eyes stung. She did not make a sound. She closed the curtain, returned to the boys, and took both their hands in hers. Thank you, she said quietly. That is enough for today. Then she sat down, opened her notebook, and began writing down every single thing she had just witnessed. The time. The distance, the width of the slit, the boys' words, their reaction speed, everything. Because Clara Hendricks understood something that $15 million and 20 specialists had missed entirely. These boys were not living in permanent darkness. The darkness had simply never been gently, carefully, respectfully interrupted before. When Trudy walked in and found Clara still seated close to the twins, her expression curdled immediately. Your job is cleaning, she said, driving the word like a nail. And then Leo, quiet little Leo who had spent his whole life being told what he could not do, looked up and said, Trudy. The light didn't hurt. The room went still. And then came the sound of footsteps on the stairs. And Daniel Whitfield appeared in the doorway, tie loosened, face unguarded, because he had been standing nearby, and he had heard two words that had not been spoken in that house in 7 years. Light. And hurt. And didn't. He looked at his sons. He looked at Clara, and in a voice he was barely holding together, he asked her one question. Can you do it again? And when that thread of light fell across the carpet a second time, and both boys turned their faces toward it like flowers finding the sun, Daniel Whitfield covered his mouth with his hand. And the tears came. 7 years of them. Here is something nobody tells you about hope. Finding it is not the hardest part. The hardest part is defending it once you have found it. Because the moment something beautiful begins to grow in a place where people have decided nothing can grow, there will always be someone who wants to pull it up by the roots. And in that Chicago penthouse, the roots of something extraordinary had just begun to push through the ground. But the storm was already gathering. Within hours of that second curtain moment, the phone calls started. Trudy had wasted no time. Dr. Frank Colton, the specialist who had spent years telling Daniel that his sons were permanently and totally blind, was on the line. His voice came through the speaker crisp and certain, the way voices sound when they have never once considered that they might be wrong. A housekeeper, he said, was playing doctor with vulnerable children. This was reckless. This was dangerous. This was the kind of false hope that caused psychological damage. And if it continued, he would be contacting the state medical board and child protective services. The threat landed in the room like a stone dropped into still water. Trudy folded her arms, satisfied. Clara said nothing. She walked back to her notebook and kept writing. Because here is what Clara understood that Dr. Colton did not. Prejudice loves to travel dressed as authority. It wears a badge, speaks in technical language, and counts on you being too intimidated to ask for the evidence behind the certainty. Clara was not intimidated. She was methodical. Data has no skin color, she said quietly to Daniel when the call ended. No paycheck. No job title. It either holds or it doesn't. And ours holds every single time. When state officials arrived at the door, Clara spread her notebook across the table without flinching. Every session documented. Every parameter recorded. Curtain slit width. Ambient light levels. Distance. The boys' response times. Their exact words. Video clips timestamped and labeled. A 4-week safety protocol she had written herself, with clear rules about duration, intensity, and the children's absolute right to stop at any moment. The officials watched the clips. They watched Leo and Eli turn their faces toward a thread of light. They watched small hands track a moving shadow. They watched 2 little boys smiling. Then they asked the boys directly whether the light had hurt them. Eli looked up and answered without hesitation. No, not when Miss Clara does it. The officials closed their folders. No immediate harm. No unlicensed medical treatment. Sensory play, carefully documented, conducted under full consent. The complaint was not upheld. But Clara knew this was only the first wave. There would be more. Daniel had already booked an appointment at Chicago Children's Hospital with Dr. Helen Reeves, a pediatric ophthalmologist whose reputation was built on getting things right rather than getting things settled quickly. The morning of the appointment, Clara walked into the hospital beside Leo and Eli, carrying a neat folder that the receptionist stared at for a moment too long. It was more thorough than most files submitted by doctors. She had brought the video evidence, the session logs, the safety protocol, and a written summary of every observation from the past several days. Dr. Reeves did not dismiss any of it. She ran 4 tests: pupillary light reflex, optokinetic nystagmus, visual evoked potentials, full field stimulus threshold, all of them gentle, all of them conducted with the boys' full cooperation, because Dr. Reeves had taken the time before a single test began to sit at their level, introduce herself, and promise them that nothing would hurt. Between each test, she asked one simple question. Stop or continue? Every single time, Leo and Eli said continue. When the results came back, Dr. Reeves sat across from Daniel and Clara and placed the summary between them on the table. Both boys showed functional vision of approximately 30%. They had never been totally blind. Daniel stared at the page. His hands were trembling. So we lost time, he said. Dr. Reeves met his gaze, honest and warm in equal measure. We lost some time, but what matters now is what we do with what remains. She turned to Clara. What you did at home, slow, documented, consent-based, is exactly how we would proceed clinically. Keep your protocol. We will build around it. But the question that was sitting in the room, the question that nobody had yet said out loud, was this. How had 2 little boys spent 7 years being told they were totally blind when they were not? The answer was buried in an audit log. Deep inside the electronic medical records from the night Leo and Eli were born, there was a note. A single line, written by a doctor in the neonatal unit. Possible light perception. To be investigated. That note had never been followed up. More than that, someone had gone back into the system and deleted it from the assessment. And in its place, entered 2 words that had governed the lives of this family ever since. Total. Blind. The audit log recorded exactly when the change was made and exactly whose login had made it. And then came Pearl. Pearl was a nurse who had worked for 4 years at Dr. Colton's clinic. She contacted Clara and Daniel's legal team through a secure channel, voice steady but hands shaking when she finally sat down to give her account. She had seen the light perception flags being pushed aside. She had heard the verbal instruction passed down through the clinic like an unspoken rule. Don't complicate it for the parents. Keep it simple. Keep it total. She had kept screenshots, internal emails, extracted audit records she had quietly saved before she resigned, because her conscience had refused to let her walk away with nothing. I feared for my job, she said, but I feared silence more. The civil rights attorney who took the case, Veronica Osei, was not the kind of woman who raised her voice to be heard. She didn't need to. She built the case the way Clara had built her protocol. Carefully, methodically, one documented truth at a time. And when the media came for Clara, as they always do for people who refuse to stay in the box that has been built for them, Veronica was ready. The headlines were ugly. Reckless Maid conducts home experiments on billionaire's blind twins. Quote marks around the word maid, designed to reduce a woman to a single dismissive noun. Anonymous experts warning of trauma. Carefully edited clips stripped of context. Clara did not respond to the headlines. She updated her tracking chart. In the deposition that followed, Dr. Colton's own words were played back to him. The audio from the Hamilton home where he had used the phrase, "the help should know her place." The internal emails recovered by Pearl. The audit log showing the deletion of the light perception note with his login credentials and timestamp attached. His lawyer tried to call it hearsay. Veronica called it evidence. The courtroom on the day of the verdict was absolutely silent when the jury returned. Liable on negligent misdiagnosis. Liable on systemic malpractice and deliberate suppression of diagnostic information. Liable on defamation of Clara Hendricks. The judge added special orders. An independent audit of 7 years of patient records. Mandatory anti-bias training across the clinic. New state protocols requiring that light perception notes always be followed up. That no diagnosis of total blindness be made final without at least 3 independent opinions, and that diagnostic language must never use absolutes when uncertainty remains. And one more thing. The creation of a charitable fund, seeded by the defendants, to provide gentle vision stimulation programs for children across the country who might otherwise spend years in unnecessary darkness. They called it the Gentle Light Fund. The television broadcast that had called Clara a reckless Maid aired a formal retraction in prime time. She watched it from the penthouse kitchen while Eli sat beside her tracing the edge of a contrast card with his finger, and Leo stood at the window counting the light patches on the floor. "Miss Clara," Leo said softly, not turning around. The sun moved again. Clara looked over at him. "I know, baby. Tell me where." He pointed. Precisely. Confidently. Like someone who had always known how to find the light. Weeks later, on a warm afternoon in a park full of rustling trees and drifting kites, the Whitfield family spread a blanket on the grass. Celia brought apple pie. Martha set up a small speaker playing soft jazz. Daniel leaned back against a tree, watching his sons with a look on his face that had been absent for 7 years and had now come home to stay. Eli chased a kite across the sky, tracking the bright moving dot with eyes that the world had once written off entirely. Leo walked beside Clara, and when his eyes grew tired, he said his word. "Stop." Then he giggled, and carried on. A young mother approached from across the park, carrying a small boy on her hip. She looked at Clara with eyes full of something that sat right on the edge between relief and tears. "Miss Hendricks," she said quietly. My son also turned his face to a sunbeam. They told me I was imagining it. Clara knelt down to the child's level, touched his shoulder gently, and looked up at his mother. "Light can be gentle," she said. "And so can the truth." That evening, back in the penthouse, Daniel found Clara at the table finishing the last entry in her notebook. He sat down across from her, and for a moment neither of them said anything. Outside, the city was lit up in a million directions. Then Daniel spoke. Quietly, without performance. "Stay with us. Not just as coordinator. As family." Clara looked at him for a long moment. Then she smiled and said simply, "I'm here." She closed the notebook. On the very last page, in small, careful handwriting, she had written one line. Just for herself. Science does not hate careful hands. Prejudice does. And when science finally speaks the truth out loud, there is nowhere left for prejudice to hide. In the next room, Leo and Eli were already dreaming. And somewhere in those dreams, if dreams can hold such things, there were sun puddles on warm grass, and kites pulling bright threads across an open sky, and a woman who had walked into a house full of darkness and simply asked, "What if we just open the curtain a little? What about you? Is there a curtain in your life that nobody has dared to open yet? Maybe the bravest thing you will do today is reach out, take the fabric in your hands, and let in just the thinnest sliver of light. Because sometimes that is all it takes." Thank you for listening. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. And don't forget to subscribe, because the next story is already waiting, and it will find you right where you are.